My name is Isabelle Collins. I had just turned 22, graduating with honors in engineering from Oregon State University, but the feeling of victory wasn't entirely complete. Throughout 4 years of college, I didn't receive a single dollar from my parents for tuition or living expenses. From the moment I got my acceptance letter, they bluntly said, "We can't help you financially, you'll have to manage on your own." So I studied full-time while working mornings at a cafe, afternoons in a lab, and tutoring online at night. I managed to pay tuition, cover rent, handle every expense, and push myself not to collapse. Meanwhile, my family maintained a perfect image in front of the neighbors in Crescent Bay, the oceanfront house with the white picket fence, weekend parties filled with laughter, and endless stories about their 2 daughters. But the truth behind closed doors was far from that picture. My parents always favored Samantha, my older sister, from covering her full tuition when she studied fashion design in New York, to funding her inspiration trips across Europe, and even bankrolling 3 different startup projects she ran into the ground. Whenever I needed something, the answer was always, "You can handle it yourself, Isabelle." But for Samantha, even the smallest expense would somehow be covered. I had grown used to being the one who made do, the one mentioned last in every family conversation. On my graduation day, the sky over Corvallis was clear and blue like glass, with a light breeze and the air full of joy from thousands of students in gowns and square caps. I stood in line, scanning the crowd for my parents and Samantha, but the seats reserved for my family were empty. They hadn't come. I already knew the reason. That day, they were busy hosting a fundraising event at home to attract investors for Samantha's new project, a recycled fabric handbag brand. Even though I was used to their absence at important moments, my heart still sank. But then, when the MC announced my name for the Research and Technological Innovation Award worth $250,000 from a scientific development fund, the entire hall rose to their feet in applause. And I accepted the plaque with slightly trembling hands. In that moment, I wished my parents were there to see it, but, of course, they weren't. After the ceremony, I took a few photos with friends, bought myself a bouquet of pale blue hydrangeas, and drove back to Crescent Bay. I only planned to stay there for a few days before starting my new job in Portland, a project engineer position at a clean energy company. When I opened the familiar wooden door, the faint scent of lavender from my mother's air freshener still lingered, but the atmosphere felt different. My parents asked me a few polite questions. Was the drive tiring? Or, how's the new job? Then quickly returned to their phones and computer screens. Not a single word about the degree I had just earned or the huge award that had already been covered by the local press. It felt as if every achievement of mine was just an echo in this house, ringing for a moment, then fading into nothing, with no one caring to listen. At the time, I didn't realize that this silence was only the beginning of something much bigger, a turning point that would change my relationship with my family forever. Have you ever felt like your own family turned their back on you, as if all your worth and effort were erased in a single moment? And before we go any deeper into this story, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below. The next morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through the thin white curtains, bathing the upstairs living room in a soft golden hue. I headed down to the kitchen, where the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air. The old pine table in the corner looked the same as always, a few small scratches left by years of use, and a round burn mark from the time Samantha set down a hot teacup without a coaster. I sat down, trying to keep my tone cheerful as I told my mother about my new job in Portland, the clean energy project team I was about to join, and the storage system improvements I had been working on since my university lab days. But she only murmured, a few times, her eyes fixed on her phone, fingers moving non-stop as if replying to someone far more important. Every time I paused, hoping she might look up and ask something more, all I got in return was the sound of her sipping coffee and that same indifferent gaze. My father walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, holding a newspaper, though I knew he only carried it for show, the way he often did when he wanted to start a serious conversation. And sure enough, Barely 2 sips of coffee later, he set the paper down, looked straight at me, and spoke in a calm but calculating tone. You know, Samantha's new project needs funding to get off the ground. She's already found a few investors, but she's still missing a large sum to finish the prototype. I think, instead of letting that award money just sit there, you should give all of it to your sister. Consider it an investment in the family's future. I froze for a moment, holding back a bitter laugh. My mother quickly chimed in, this time finally looking up from her phone, her voice softer but still carrying that familiar undertone of pressure. You have a stable job now, and $250,000 is just the beginning for you. But for your sister, if she had that amount, it would save her project and protect our family's reputation. I took a deep breath, feeling every beat of my heart. In that moment, I remembered all the times I had asked for a small amount to buy textbooks and been refused, all the nights I had worked myself to exhaustion just to afford rent, while at the same time Samantha was posting photos from Rome or Paris trips fully funded by our parents. I set my coffee cup down and spoke simply, but firmly, number. The kitchen seemed to freeze. My father's brow furrowed, and my mother tilted her head at me as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. No, you're being selfish, Isabelle, my father said, his voice beginning to harden. Your family needs you, and you're only thinking about yourself. My mother followed, aren't you ashamed to leave your sister to carry everything alone? What will people think if they know you have the money but refuse to help? The air thickened, as if every molecule in the room was under pressure. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a family courtroom, the verdict already decided, just waiting for me to bow my head and accept it. But I didn't. I repeated myself, slower and clearer this time. That money is a reward for my work. I will use it to build my own life. My father's eyes flashed with a mix of disappointment and anger, and my mother let out a long sigh as if cutting off the conversation entirely. No one spoke again. The ticking of the wall clock became the only sound filling the kitchen. I finished the rest of my coffee, stood, and cleared the dishes, moving slowly to hide the slight tremor in my hands from the tension. I didn't want to stay another minute in that atmosphere. Before leaving, I simply said, I'm going out to run some errands, I'll be back tonight. No one responded. I stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me. The ocean breeze hit my face with a cool touch, but it carried a sharp, salty bite, a reminder that what had just happened was only the beginning of a coming storm. I didn't yet know that when I returned, I would never see this house as a home again. I came back to Crescent Bay in the late afternoon, the last light of the day casting a long streak of orange gold across the stone-paved street leading into the neighborhood. The sound of the waves echoed from a distance, steady like a slow heartbeat, but as soon as I turned into the narrow lane toward my house, that feeling was replaced by something else, a jumble of noises. Hushed voices, the sound of phone cameras clicking on, and a few quiet laughs. I slowed down, looking ahead toward the gate. The first thing I saw wasn't the familiar white fence, but dozens of black garbage bags piled high across the entrance. I recognized each item sticking out the strap of my old backpack, the corner of my dark blue graduation cap box, the spine of a technical book I had studied through countless long nights in the dorm. Everything had been stuffed together like worthless trash, tossed out to be taken away by the garbage truck in the morning. My father stood in the middle of the gate, arms crossed, his eyes as cold as the winter sea. My mother stood off to one side, phone in hand, but it did nothing to hide the displeasure etched across her face. And next to them, Samantha had her phone raised, the camera pointed directly at me, her voice sharp and clear in livestream mode. This is my sister. Isabelle, the freeloader who owes $8,000 in back rent and still walks around acting proud. And now, all her stuff is right here for anyone who wants to see. The stream of hearts and comments from her viewers kept flashing across the screen, reflecting in my eyes like icy needles. I walked closer, forcing myself to keep my breathing steady. What is this? I asked, my voice low but loud enough to cut through the whispers around us. My father didn't answer immediately. He glanced at my mother, then looked straight at me. The reason is very simple. You owe $8,000 in rent, and you're ungrateful. We don't keep people like that in this house. Each word fell like a heavy stone, not because I believed a single accusation, but because they were spoken in front of at least a dozen onlookers. Some of them neighbors who had always believed my family was a model household. I spotted Mrs. Davis from number 14 whispering to her husband, a young man from down the street holding his phone up to record, and a few children standing at the curb, watching me with a mix of curiosity and unease. I knew that if I tried to argue now, every word I said would be clipped, twisted, and spread as the story of the bad daughter who got kicked out by her family. So I swallowed it all down, even the lump tightening in my throat. Samantha wasn't finished. Her voice grew louder, trying to pull the crowd further into her performance. All these years, we've supported her, given her a place to live, and this is how she repays us, refusing to help the family when we need it most. I caught a glimpse of her screen and saw comments mocking me from anonymous accounts. My father stepped forward, his voice like a final verdict. You're 22 years old, take care of yourself. Get out now. Those last 4 words in English were delivered slowly and clearly, as if he wanted to be sure everyone heard them. My mother remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes never once meeting mine. I felt like I was standing on a public stage in a scene perfectly directed to cast me as the villain. I bent down to pick up each bag, each battered cardboard box, the worn canvas gloves I had used in the lab, the notebooks crammed with formulas and sketches, and the graduation cap and gown box now stained from lying on the rough cement. Every time I walked from the pile to my car and back, the neighbors' murmurs seemed to grow louder, while Samantha's phone camera stayed locked on my every move. She gave a short, mocking laugh, her voice cutting through the air. See this, everyone? This is what happens when you live off your family and don't pay your debts. A very expensive lesson. From time to time, she swung the camera toward my face, clearly hoping to catch some flash of anger or shame to show her audience. I didn't give her that chance. My face was calm, so calm it even surprised me, and every movement, from lifting my things to opening the trunk and placing them neatly inside, was slow and deliberate, as if this were nothing more than an ordinary move. But inside, I felt a fire smoldering, not one that roared into shouting, but one that burned deep, steady, and certain. When I closed the trunk, Samantha stepped closer, holding her phone nearer, her tone dripping with emphasis. Where are you going now, Isabelle? Off to find someone else to freeload from. I lifted my head and looked straight at her, my gaze cold enough to make her step back half a pace. I spoke, loud enough for her, my parents, and every neighbor to hear. You'll be hearing from me soon. No raised voice, no overt threat, but the words cut into the air like a thin blade, slipping between us and embedding themselves into the memory of everyone present. Samantha blinked, then gave a faint, dismissive smile as if it meant nothing, but I noticed her fingers tighten slightly around her phone. My father stood near the front door, saying nothing, just watching as I walked past the fence. My mother had already turned away, stepping inside, her shoulders trembling slightly as though to avoid meeting any eyes. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. The faint scent of lavender from a torn bag drifted into the cabin, pulling me back to all those late nights studying alone in the dorm, when a lavender oil diffuser had been the only thing that helped me sleep a few hours. I started the car, the sound of the engine breaking the quiet of the beachside street. Through the windshield, I could still see a few neighbors lingering, some shaking their heads, others slipping silently back into their homes, all wearing the same expression, the look of people who had just witnessed a family drama but weren't sure which side to believe. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, not from fear or shame, but from holding back the urge to turn around and spill the entire truth right then and there. But I knew this wasn't the time. I eased the car forward, the tires humming softly over the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, the house shrank with each passing second, finally disappearing behind the curve that led to the main road. I didn't look back. Not because I was afraid to see my parents and Samantha one more time, but because I had made a decision from the moment they piled my belongings at the gate. I would leave them exactly where they had chosen to stand. Behind me. The road ahead was long, and I knew that when the right moment came, my promise, "You'll be hearing from me soon," would become reality, not in a burst of rage, but in a response strong enough that they would never forget it. I drove straight to Claire's apartment, a narrow street just a few blocks from Crescent Bay's shoreline, where two-story red brick buildings stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a row of old maples. Claire had already heard what happened from a short message I sent when I left the house, and when I pulled up to the gate, she was already there waiting, wrapped in a gray hoodie, holding a cup of hot tea. "Oh my God, Isabelle, come in," she said softly, her voice filled with concern but without a single probing question. I only nodded, holding back everything that had happened that afternoon, and together we carried my bags up to her small second-floor apartment. Claire's apartment was warm and tidy, the smell of fresh-baked waffles mingling with the scent of dried basil hanging in the kitchen corner. She cleared out her workroom for me, setting up a folding bed and stacking extra blankets and pillows nearby. I didn't say much, just thanked her, then began unpacking each bag, straightening my belongings so they wouldn't wrinkle. Notebooks stacked neatly on the desk, clothes hung in the closet, documents and keepsakes tucked into the drawers. When I unzipped an old suitcase, I found beneath a layer of thick winter coats a pale yellow envelope, its edges slightly worn, the handwriting unmistakably familiar. "Open only when you truly have no one left to lean on." My heart stopped for a beat. I recognized my grandmother Margaret's handwriting immediately. She had passed away when I was 18. Back then, I still lived with my parents, but she had always been my greatest source of strength. She often told me, "Isabelle, you must hold on to your worth. Don't let anyone forget it." I sat on the bed, running my fingers gently along the envelope's edge, feeling as though the ink still held the warmth of her hands. Inside was a handwritten letter, several original documents, and another small folded piece of paper. The letter began with the familiar salutation. "To my Isabelle." The handwriting trembled slightly but remained clear. "If you're reading this, it means you've found yourself in the situation I always feared. You are bright and strong, but you are also someone whose kindness can be taken advantage of. I have prepared so that you will never be left with nothing to your name. These are the documents proving you are co-owner of 40% of the house in Crescent Bay, 50% of the cabin at Lake Willowa, and 40% of the commercial building in the center of town. These properties have been legalized and recorded in your name. No one can sell or transfer them without your signature. Do not let anyone convince you to give them up. And remember, your worth is not just in the numbers on paper, but in who you are." I set the letter down and opened the stack of accompanying documents. All were original, notarized copies, the red seals still vivid. My name appeared on each ownership record alongside my parents', and nowhere did Samantha's name appear. The small folded piece of paper contained just one handwritten sentence: "Don't let anyone forget your worth." She had said it to me many times, but reading it now, in this moment, sent a cold shiver down my spine. I leaned back against the bed, letting it all sink in. Suddenly, the pieces began to fit together why my parents had repeatedly tried to get me to sign inheritance adjustment papers over the past 2 years. The stories they made up to convince me I should let someone else handle it, because you're busy with school, you don't have time for paperwork. And now, their demand that I hand over the entire $250,000 award to Samantha was simply the next step in pushing me to give up the remaining assets they couldn't fully control. A slow, cold anger rose within me, not a sudden blaze, but something steady and sharp, like an underground current building strength beneath ice. I realized I hadn't been thrown out for owing money or being ungrateful, as they proclaimed that was just a pretext. The truth was, they wanted me erased from the picture so they could seize everything my grandmother had left me. They had started long ago, and this afternoon was merely the final move to cut me out entirely. I carefully placed the envelope and documents into a zippered pouch, storing it in the nightstand by the bed, locking it with a combination padlock. Claire stepped in, handing me a cup of hot chamomile tea. I don't know exactly what happened out there, but I believe you'll find a way, she said, her eyes sincere. I gave a faint smile, not telling her everything, and replied, I just found something my grandmother left me, and I think this is only the beginning. Though. That night, I lay in the small but safe room, listening to the sound of the waves breaking against the shore through the half-open window. In the darkness, the bigger picture became clearer than ever. My family didn't just want my award money, they wanted to erase my name from everything my grandmother had fought to protect. But this time, I had both proof and reason to stand my ground. And I knew that when I made my move, no one would see it coming. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, my mind still spinning from the words in my grandmother's letter. The pale light of dawn filtered through the thin curtains, falling on the zippered pouch where I had stored all the documents. I brewed a cup of strong black coffee, took a few sips to steady my heartbeat, then opened my laptop to search for the contact information of Richard Hale, the name I had seen in some of my grandmother's old paperwork. He was the lawyer she had trusted for many years, the one who had handled the transfer of ownership for the Lake Willowa cabin and the commercial building. I could still faintly remember him in a gray suit, speaking slowly, his eyes sharp but warm when he shook my hand at her funeral. When I called his office, a polite female voice answered, "Law Office of Mr. Hale, how may I help you?" I introduced myself as Isabelle, granddaughter of Margaret Collins. The moment she heard my grandmother's name, the secretary hesitated for a beat before saying, "Please hold, Mr. Hale will definitely want to speak with you directly." Less than a minute later, a deep, familiar male voice came on the line. "Isabelle, Margaret's granddaughter, after all these years, you still remember me?" I took a deep breath and replied, "I need to see you. It's about the properties she left." His tone shifted to something more serious. "All right, come to my office at 10 o'clock this morning. Bring every document you have." Mr. Hale's office was in a stately red brick building on the corner of Crescent Bay's downtown street. When I stepped inside, the scent of polished wood and old paper gave the place a feeling that was both formal and safe. Richard, his hair now far grayer than I remembered, rose from his desk as soon as he saw me and shook my hand firmly. "Margaret always said you were strong-willed, now I see why." I placed the zippered pouch on his desk and pulled out my grandmother's envelope along with all the documents. He put on his glasses and read each page with deliberate care, occasionally nodding, occasionally narrowing his eyes as he scrutinized every legal detail. After nearly half an hour, he looked up, his voice firm. "All of these documents are legal and currently in effect. Your name is on the co-ownership contracts, which means no one, not even your parents, can sell, mortgage, or transfer these properties without your signed consent. They can manage operations if given authority, but they cannot remove you from ownership. Margaret was very thorough in making sure you were protected." Hearing that, I felt both a wave of relief and a stronger fire burning inside me. "So if they've been profiting from these properties without giving me my share, what then?" I asked. Richard tilted his head slightly, a spark of interest in his eyes. "Then you have the right to demand compensation, along with a full accounting of the records." How were 5? I told him everything that had happened over the past 2 years, from the times my parents repeatedly tried to get me to sign inheritance adjustment papers, to yesterday when they publicly kicked me out, and the demand that I hand over my $250,000 award to Samantha. Richard listened silently, occasionally jotting down notes in his leather-bound notebook. When I finished, he nodded. "It's clear they've been trying to cut you out of your entitlements. The first thing we need to do is end all direct communication between you and them on this matter. You'll sign a power of attorney so that from now on, any contact regarding these assets must go through my office." I signed on the spot, my pen strokes steady and certain. It felt like I had just built a solid wall between myself and their calculated attacks. Richard continued. "Step 2, we will send them a formal request for all financial statements, rental agreements, and invoices related to the Lake Willowa cabin and the commercial building from the past 3 years. At the same time, I'll have an independent auditor review the cash flow." I leaned back in my chair, feeling lighter, yet still simmering. "And if they refuse?" He allowed himself a small smile. Then we take it to court. With the evidence and legal ownership on your side, your chances are extremely strong. Before I left, Richard rested his hand on my grandmother's envelope and looked at me intently. Margaret left you more than property. She left you the belief that you have the strength to protect yourself. Don't ever forget that. I nodded, placed the documents back in the zippered pouch, and stepped out of the office. The skies over Crescent Bay were now clear, sunlight spilling across the brick-paved street, and for the first time in years, I felt I was walking a path my parents could not control. That evening, back at Claire's apartment, I told her about the plan. She smiled with open support. So now they're about to face an Isabelle they've never met before. I simply nodded. Inside, everything was clear. This game now had new rules and I was the one writing them. It took less than a week for Richard to send out the formal requests and receive the first response from my parents. They sent back a few rough spreadsheets, missing official stamps and without any rental contracts attached, as if they thought I wouldn't have the patience to verify them. But that only made Richard dig deeper. He contacted the county's business registry and local property management offices, pulling tax records, lease agreements, and payment schedules. 3 days later, I got a call from him, his voice carrying both satisfaction and a flicker of outrage on my behalf. Isabelle, over the past 3 years, the Lake Willowa cabin and the commercial building have brought in more than $80,000 in net rental income. Not a single cent of it was sent to you, even though you are a lawful co-owner. My grip tightened on the phone, heat rushing to my face. $80,000, the same amount I had scraped together over thousands of grueling work hours during college, should have been mine by right. We'll demand full compensation, I said immediately, my tone so calm it surprised even me. Richard agreed, then suggested another critical step. You should hire an independent property management company. That way, every cent will be tracked transparently, and your family will have no room to interfere. I agreed without hesitation. We quickly chose a reputable firm in Portland, signing a contract for them to take over all operations, for both the cabin and the building, from rent collection to maintenance, with regular reports sent directly to me and the law office. When the management transfer notices were sent out, my family's side went completely silent. No emails, no calls, no explanations. That silence didn't mean they were accepting it, it meant they were regrouping, planning another move. I knew this kind of silence well, it was the pause before a storm. And the storm arrived on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was wrapping up at my new clean energy job. I was tidying my desk when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Do you have 5 minutes, Isabelle?" I turned to see Samantha standing there in a camel-colored coat, her phone in hand like it was an extension of her body. A few of my coworkers glanced up, sensing the tension in the air. We stepped into the hallway, the neon lights casting a cold sheen on the tiled floor. Samantha crossed her arms, tilting her head, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "You're tearing this family apart over a few pieces of paper. $80,000 isn't worth destroying Mom and Dad's and your sister's reputation. What do you think the people in Crescent Bay will say when they find out?" I didn't answer. Instead, I quietly took out my phone and switched on the recorder. She went on, each word aimed to dig deeper. "Grandma left those things for the family to share, not for you to use as a weapon against us. If you drop your claim, we'll let this go." I let her finish, then slipped my phone back into my pocket, my voice calm. "You just confirmed, in front of a witness and on a recording, that the money is mine by inheritance. Thank you, that will be very useful to my lawyer." Samantha's face flickered, the change quick but noticeable, before she masked it with a strained smile. "You'll regret this," she said, and turned away, the sharp echo of her heels carrying down the hallway. That very night, I sent the full recording and a written account of the meeting to Richard. His reply was short, "Well done. Let them keep backing themselves into a corner." I turned off my phone and sat at the small desk in my apartment, looking out the window where the soft amber glow of the street lamp shimmered on the rain-slick pavement. I knew this fight was far from over, but step by step, I was tipping the scales in my favor, not with noise or anger, but with evidence they couldn't deny. And that was the kind of blow they would never recover from. Later that evening, Crescent Bay's skies hung heavy and gray, the sea wind lashing hard enough to send the old maples outside Claire's porch swaying. I was in the living room, my laptop open to review the latest report from the property management company, when noise began to rise from the street below. At first it was the muddled sound of footsteps and voices, but it quickly swelled into the chaos of a full-blown argument spilling into the road. Claire, who was in the kitchen washing dishes, leaned out to glance through the window, then turned back to me with tension in her eyes. "Isabelle, I think it's your family." I walked to the window and lifted the curtain slightly. The street lamp's yellow glow fell over the group gathered right in front of the building. My father, tall and rigid, his shoulders shaking with fury, my mother beside him, both hands covering her face. Her sobs projected loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, and Samantha, of course, phone held high, camera aimed at the entrance, her face split between a mocking smile and a defiant challenge. Across the street, a few neighbors had stopped on the opposite sidewalk, watching like they'd stumbled upon some late-night street theater. The knocking started out steady, then quickly turned into loud, heavy pounding. My father's voice came through, low and sharp. "Isabelle, open the door. We need to talk right now." I stayed where I was, my eyes fixed on the frame of the door. My mother's crying grew louder, broken up by gasping phrases. How could you do this to your own family? 80,000, it's just money." The sound echoed up the stairwell, filling the narrow hallway. I took a deep breath, stepped closer to the door, but didn't open it. My voice carried clearly, calm and firm. "All matters go through my lawyer." Silence hung for a few seconds before Samantha's voice cut in, deliberately pitched so her phone's microphone would catch every word. "Did you all hear that? She's hiding in here, too scared to face her own family. All over a few papers and some rent money." I could imagine the comments flooding her screen, the chorus of strangers chiming in to judge or speculate, but none of it shook me anymore. My father pounded harder, each thud ringing sharply through the stillness of the apartment. "Isabelle, you think you're better than us just because you've got a few pieces of paper? Get out here now." I glanced at Claire. She gave a small shake of her head, signaling me to hold my ground. I answered, my voice neither raised nor trembling. "I have nothing more to say. If there's an issue, Mr. Hale will contact you." I made sure to emphasize, Mr. Hale, like a legal barricade set firmly between us. Outside, I heard murmurs, then Samantha's mocking laugh. She kept sweeping her phone around, aiming it at the door, pacing as she spoke. "See this? This is what happens when someone lets a lawyer control them instead of listening to their parents." My mother occasionally chimed in with loud sobs, while my father's patience thinned. I heard him step further away, speaking to a neighbor, though I couldn't make out his words. About 10 minutes later, when it was clear I wasn't going to open the door, the noise outside began to fade. The mix of laughter, crying, and taunts thinned out. Samantha lowered her phone, frustration breaking through when she realized her live stream wasn't giving her the spectacle she wanted. My father turned, waving for everyone to leave. My mother followed, still dabbing at her eyes in a performative gesture. Through the slit in the curtain, I watched their figures disappear around the corner, leaving the small courtyard empty under the streetlight, the ocean wind sweeping through and carrying a few dry leaves with it. I closed the curtain and turned back into the room, a quiet sense of relief settling in my chest. Claire handed me a cup of hot tea and smiled gently. "You just showed them you're no longer the person who'll open the door just to hear more accusations." I nodded, holding the cup close, listening to the distant echo of waves. The humiliation they carried home tonight was probably only the beginning, but I knew I'd held my ground, and once this wall was built, no one would break through it easily. 3 days after the scene outside Claire's apartment, Richard called me. His tone was calm but laced with dry humor. "Isabelle, they've backed down a bit. I just received a settlement offer from your family." I raised an eyebrow, already suspecting there was nothing honest about it. "Sure enough," he continued. "They say they'll give you full ownership of the Lake Willowa cabin if you drop the $80. 000 restitution demand and end all other legal claims. I let out a quiet laugh. The cabin had deep sentimental value, but its annual income was nothing compared to the commercial building. Clearly, they were trying to bait me with nostalgia while keeping the real profit stream for themselves. Decline, I said immediately, my voice firm. Tell them there's only one set of terms I'll accept. 1. Full repayment of the $80,000 they took, plus interest as required by law. 2. All properties, the cabin, the Crescent Bay house, and the commercial building must be placed under independent management, cutting them off from the cash flow entirely. 3. They sign a document admitting wrongdoing and affirming my co-ownership rights as legal and immutable unless I agree otherwise. Richard was silent for a few seconds, then gave a low chuckle. That's going to be a heavy hit, but are you sure? Because once they sign, there's no going back. I answered without hesitation, that's exactly what I want. In the days that followed, I hardly had to do anything beyond focusing on my work in Portland while Richard handled every exchange. But word from Crescent Bay still reached me through social media and a few old friends. Since the live stream stunt outside Claire's apartment, Samantha had lost thousands of followers on the platform she used to promote her recycled fabric handbag brand. A clipped segment from that stream had gone viral with comments condemning her for publicly humiliating her own sister for clout. Small business partners were now hesitant to work with her, worried about the damage to their brand image. My father's setback was even harsher. One of his key contracts with a local construction firm was abruptly canceled. A source told me the other party wanted nothing to do with a family entangled in legal disputes and public gossip. For my father, losing that contract meant losing face, something he valued as much as money. My mother didn't escape the fallout either. Once an active member of the Crescent Bay Women's Association, she now found people avoiding her after rumors spread that she'd thrown her own daughter out over money. At meetings, greetings grew noticeably colder, and the once friendly small talk was replaced by silence. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel guilty either. What they were facing now was simply the natural consequence of their own actions. Richard kept me updated, saying that at first they still tried to bargain, asking to reduce the restitution, delaying the transfer of management, or demanding that I sign a confidentiality clause. I held my ground, no compromise. If they want to close this chapter, they meet all 3 conditions. No more, no less. I repeated to him every time there was news. Finally, on a Monday morning, Richard sent me a brief email with an attachment. They've accepted every condition. I opened the file, a formal statement admitting wrongdoing, bearing the notarized signatures of my father, mother, and Samantha. It stated clearly that they had withheld profits from the properties for the past 3 years, committed to repaying the full amount with interest, transferred all management rights to the independent company I had chosen, and acknowledged my co-ownership under the law. I sat still for a few minutes, my fingers gliding lightly over the screen as if to make sure it wasn't an illusion. This wasn't just a legal win, it was the affirmation of my worth, something they had tried to deny me for years. I sent Richard a short reply. Thank you. Let's proceed immediately. Inside, I felt one door close, but at the same time, another opened, leading to a life where, from now on, I alone held the keys. I moved into my new apartment in Portland on a weekend morning as autumn had just begun. The unit was on the 7th floor of a building overlooking the Willamette River, with a small balcony just big enough for a round table and a few pots of lavender, a scent forever tied to memories of my grandmother. Every expense, from the deposit to the furniture, I paid for entirely from my own engineering salary. No more counting pennies the way I had in college, though I still kept my habit of planned, deliberate spending. Each time I stepped into the sunlit living room, I felt a quiet pride. This was a space I had built myself, one no one could control or threaten to take away. Work at the clean energy company had settled into a steady rhythm, and after just 3 months I was entrusted with leading a new project. In the evenings, I often sat at my desk, watching the city lights ripple across the river, reminding myself that everything I had now came from persistence and from the courage to say no when it mattered. Over time, the memories of arguments, accusations, and the contempt in their eyes the day I was thrown out began to fade. Until one April evening, when my phone started buzzing nonstop on the table. It began with a few texts from my mother's number. Within an hour, they multiplied into dozens, mixed with messages from my father. When I unlocked the screen, the number stopped me cold, more than 60 unread texts. The content repeated itself. Where are you? Talk to us. With longer ones weaving between reproach and pleading. You can't stay silent forever. We're still family, don't make this worse. I miss you, please come home so we can talk. Who? I set the phone back down, a strange yet familiar feeling stirring the old pressure from years of being forced to respond, to explain, to bend. But I wasn't in that position anymore. I stepped out onto the balcony, breathing in the scent of freshly watered lavender. The city lights shimmered below, the sound of traffic mingling with the wind high above. I remembered vividly that afternoon at the Crescent Bay gate, dozens of black trash bags holding my belongings, my father standing with his arms crossed, saying coldly, "You're 22 years old. Take care of yourself. Get out now." The sensation of being cut out of what they called a family, without a single voice in my defense, remained like a scar that had never healed. I went back inside, picked up my phone, and looked at the list of messages. My finger hovered over the reply button, then stopped. I locked the screen and placed it face down on the table. Not because I wanted to retaliate with silence, but because I knew I didn't owe them a conversation anymore. I had chosen my own path, and the memory of that day was enough to remind me that some doors, once closed, never open again. One early summer afternoon, I was cleaning the apartment in preparation for changing some furniture. While pulling out a stack of old cardboard boxes from the closet, a small silver USB stick slipped out from a folder I had brought from Crescent Bay. I vaguely remembered it being one of the items my grandmother Margaret kept in the drawer of her writing desk, but at the time, I had never opened it. Curious, I plugged it into my laptop. There was only one file, titled Isabelle, MP3. My heartbeat slowed as I clicked to open it. My grandmother's voice filled the room warm, slightly husky, exactly as I remembered every word deliberate and clear. When you stop letting them use you, they will call it betrayal. Let them. Be yourself. Just one short sentence, yet it resonated in the quiet like a familiar melody I'd been waiting my whole life to hear again. I sat still for a few minutes, eyes closed, letting her words drift through my mind like a cool breeze. Memories came rushing back, her hand holding mine when I was small, the afternoons we spent on the porch listening to the waves, the advice that had seemed so simple but turned out to be the compass for my entire life. She had known there would come a day when I'd face a choice, stay silent and be controlled, or stand up and accept being seen as the betrayer. And she wanted me to remember that blind loyalty was never the same as love. I saved the recording to my phone and backed it up to the cloud, a permanent reminder. Then I smiled, not with smug triumph, but with the peace of knowing I had walked the path she hoped I would. I had protected my material rights, not only keeping the assets she left me, but making sure they could never be taken. More importantly, I had protected my right to decide my own life. Where to live, what to do, who to love, and which relationships to keep. When I closed the USB and placed it back in the drawer, I looked around my sunlit apartment, listening to the hum of traffic in the distance, and felt a rare kind of calm. I knew that while the past still lingered with scars that would never fully fade, the future was mine and I would move forward, carrying my grandmother's words like a small light, bright enough to guide me, warm enough to remind me I was never truly alone. If you're watching this and you've ever been hurt by the very people who share your blood, I want you to know one thing: you are not alone. There are wounds you can't see, but they sit deep in the heart, smoldering over the years, the cold stare of a parent, the comparisons that quietly kill your self-worth, the moment you were abandoned in your own home. We grow up believing family will always protect us. But the truth is, not every blood tie is healthy or safe. Real love does not come with control, exploitation, or contempt. And setting boundaries, saying no, when you need to, does not make you a traitor. It simply means you have chosen to love and protect yourself. I know that letting go of a toxic family relationship is never easy. You will be called terrible names, accused of being ungrateful, and pushed into feeling guilty. But remember this, your worth is not measured by how much pain you can endure, but by your courage to protect your peace and your dignity. Believe that you deserve a life that is safe, whole, and surrounded by people who respect and cherish you. Blood ties are not a reason to accept endless hurt. You have every right to choose your own family, whether they come from where you were born or from the connections you create along the way. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.